If you've ever transplanted tomatoes and watched them just sit there for weeks, yellowing, sulking, doing absolutely nothing, you're not alone. I've been gardening long enough to know that tomatoes are generous plants, but they're also incredibly sensitive at transplant time. One wrong move, and you lose weeks of growth before the season even begins. Here on Soilpower, I don't like repeating advice just because it's popular. I like to test things in real soil, under real conditions, the way home gardeners actually grow. So this season I decided to put 3 common tomato transplanting methods head-to-head in the same garden, with the same soil, the same weather, and the same tomato variety. What happened surprised me, and one method didn't just perform better, it blew the others out of the water. Transplanting isn't just about moving a seedling from a pot into the ground, it's a major stress event for the plant. Roots are disturbed, moisture levels change, soil microbes shift, and the plant has to decide whether to focus on survival or growth. Many gardeners focus on fertilizer schedules or pruning, but if you get transplanting wrong, you're starting the race with a limp. On the other hand, if you transplant correctly, tomatoes respond with explosive root growth, thicker stems, and earlier flowering. That's why this test matters, especially if you want stronger plants without relying on heavy feeding later. To keep things fair, I used the same tomato variety for all 3 methods, started at the same time and grown under identical conditions until transplant day. All seedlings were healthy, about 15 to 20 centimeters tall, and hardened off properly. They went into the same garden bed, spaced evenly, and watered the same way. The only difference was how they were transplanted. This is how most gardeners start, and how I did for years. The seedling is removed from its pot, placed in a hole just deep enough to cover the root ball, and backfilled with soil. No stem buried, no special amendments, no tricks. At first glance, these transplants looked fine. The leaves stayed upright, there was no dramatic wilting, and they appeared to take quickly. But after the first week, growth slowed. New leaves were smaller, stems stayed thin, and the plants focused more on staying alive than pushing upward. By week 3 they were clearly behind the others. They weren't unhealthy, but they lacked vigor. This method works, but it's a bare minimum approach. It keeps tomatoes alive, but it doesn't help them thrive. This method is, widely recommended for tomatoes because they can form roots along buried stems. I removed the lower leaves and planted the seedlings deep, burying nearly 2/3 of the stem underground. Early on, this method showed promise. The plants paused for a few days as they adjusted, but once they settled in, stem thickness improved noticeably. Leaves became darker green, and growth picked up after the initial slowdown. However, there was a catch. In heavier soil, deep planting meant cooler, wetter conditions around the buried stem. After heavy watering, growth temporarily stalled again. These plants eventually outperformed the shallow transplants, but the progress was steady, not dramatic. Deep planting is effective, but it relies heavily on good drainage and soil structure. In compacted or poorly aerated soil, it can limit oxygen to new roots, slowing things down. This was the method that, honestly, changed everything. Instead of planting straight down, I dug a shallow horizontal trench. I laid the tomato seedling sideways, gently bending the top upward so only the growing tip and top leaves were above the soil. The rest of the stem was buried just a few centimeters deep. Within days, the difference was obvious. These plants didn't just recover faster, they took off. New growth appeared almost immediately. The stems thickened rapidly, leaves were broader, and the plants developed a strong, upright posture far earlier than the others. By week 2 they were clearly taller and bushier. By week 4 they were flowering first, when I checked soil moisture and gently inspected root zones. Later, in the season, the reason became clear. These plants had developed massive, shallow root systems spreading outward instead of struggling downward. This method maximized oxygen exposure, microbial activity, and moisture balance, all in the most biologically active layer of the soil. The top few centimeters of soil are where life happens. That's where beneficial microbes are most active, organic matter breaks down fastest, and oxygen is readily available. By placing the stem horizontally in this zone, the tomato was encouraged to form dozens of roots along its length in ideal conditions. Instead of one central root mass, the plant built a wide foundation. That translated into better nutrient uptake, improved drought resilience, and faster top growth. The plant didn't waste energy adapting, it surged forward. This method also reduced transplant shock. Because the stem wasn't buried deep in cold, dense soil, the plant transitioned smoothly without stress-induced stalling. If you're growing tomatoes in real garden soil, not perfect potting mix, this method is, honestly, a game changer. It's especially effective in raised beds, no-dig systems, or biologically active soils where life is concentrated near the surface. For beginners, it removes much of the guesswork. You don't need special fertilizers or expensive inputs. You're simply working with how tomatoes naturally root instead of forcing them into less favorable conditions. For experienced gardeners, it's a powerful way to get earlier harvests, stronger plants, and better resilience during heat and dry spells. Even with the sideways method, there are, some pitfalls. Don't bend the stem sharply. It should curve gently upward. Always remove leaves that will be buried to prevent rot. Water thoroughly after planting, but avoid compacting the soil. Loose, crumbly soil allows roots to expand quickly. And most importantly, don't rush transplanting before the soil has warmed. Even the best method can't compensate for cold, lifeless soil. After 2 months, the difference was undeniable. The shallow transplants lagged behind in size and yield. The deep-planted tomatoes did well but took longer to find their rhythm. The sideways trench-planted tomatoes dominated the bed, produced earlier flowers, and carried heavier fruit loads. I didn't expect such a clear winner, but that's why testing matters. If you want tomatoes that grow fast, resist stress, and make full use of your soil's biology, the sideways transplant method is worth adopting this season. If this experiment helped you rethink how you transplant tomatoes, imagine what else you could unlock by working with your soil instead of against it. Here on Soilpower, we test, observe, and share what actually works, so you don't have to guess. If you enjoyed this article, make sure to subscribe to the Soilpower YouTube channel, share it with a fellow gardener, and let me know in the comments which transplanting method you're going to try next. Strong soil grows powerful plants, and we're just getting started.